It was only when I got out there at the beginning that I realised the importance of what I was trying to say. These stories of extraordinary courage, of love, of human strength, of endurance, of tenacity, of the possibility of hope that is in existence all around the world. Those stories had to be told. And I have a modicum of a gift that I've been given in that I can express it through my paints and through my hands. So damn well put yourself second and go and do it, is what I thought. And if there are risks, what is life worth living without the risk? My name is Arabella Dorman. I'm an artist, a war artist, a portrait painter, and a humanitarian installation artist, and I'm a mother as well, which is very important to me. I guess traditionally a war artist was someone who was employed by a nation or a government to go off and record and document the conflict that that nation was involved in, and hopefully to report and paint great victories therein. That shifted in the First World War, and war artists were commissioned by the MOD to record both the loss and the sacrifice and the cost of conflict. My interest, and where I see my remit really, is to record the long-term consequences of war across the world, as well as the short-term repercussions of war, to reveal the human face of war. The things that aren't necessarily reported by the newspapers and by the headlines, the hidden stories of fortitude and courage and sacrifice, the quieter, unseen human heartbeat that happens behind the scenes in all wars. It's always incredibly difficult to leave, and to leave voluntarily, to go to a war zone. And you might not return. Of course, that's very, very hard. One of the hardest times ever of my life was when I went back to Afghanistan and I left my 2-year-old daughter and 4-month-old son in the middle of the night, bitterly cold, knowing how dangerous it was in Afghanistan. I'd written my pre-deployment letters to my husband, to my parents, to my whole family, because I genuinely thought there was a high chance I might not come home. It changes the way you look at the world. It changes the way you look at your family, but also your faith, your feeling of duty or responsibility to the work you do. And it really, I'd like to think, means that you try not to take anything for granted again. You realise what immeasurable gifts we've all been given to live in peace, with security, all these things that I think so often are taken for granted. These are just such incredible gifts, and they can be taken away just as quickly. And I think that's what you start to see in the theatre of war, or when you're working with refugees. But for the grace of God, this could be you, this could be your family. There's nothing that separates you. There's no difference between me and you or the refugee I've just pulled out of the sea. What I try and do with my work is to seek to elicit the human connection that you can make in that regard, and to break down the walls that continue to be put up and built around the world, and instead to try and find a bridge over to the other person. I don't believe you can live life truly without risk. You've got to throw yourself into it. And if you believe in something, and I believe in telling stories through my paintings, and I believe in telling stories about human beings, and I believe that war tells those stories most truthfully and most powerfully, then you've got to follow it. It was only when I got out there at the beginning that I realised the importance of what I was trying to say. That these stories of extraordinary courage, of love, of human strength, of endurance, of tenacity, of the possibility of hope that is in existence all around the world, those stories had to be told. And I have a modicum of a gift that I've been given in that I can express it through my paints and through my hands. So damn well put yourself second and go and do it, is what I thought. And if there are risks, what is life worth living without the risk? I still believe that. I mean, I was in Ukraine last year, trying again to find those stories of light in the darkness, and gosh, did I find them. Such extraordinary stories of courage and utter self-sacrifice from the soldiers coming back from the front line in the east, but also from every single Ukrainian living under those missiles every day. A whole country united in a common purpose, and still finding the ability to dance on a summer's evening in the parks, or children playing in the playground. And then there's another air raid, there's a siren, and everyone has to get underground, but they will keep on smiling, keep on living with dignity, and keep on living with hope. That has to be told. Definitely, there are a few paintings that I am most proud of from my Afghan work. They normally focus on children, especially girls. So one painting I did of a little girl in a red dress. She was standing on a huge landfill rubbish dump, and the air was black with flies, and it was quite dangerous to be there. So we couldn't stop, but this little girl, I just saw her on the top of this pile of rubbish, and she just stared straight into my soul. It was incredibly moving and powerful. She must have been about 6, 7 years old. And I just had to remember that and commit it to my mind to paint it later. I didn't take any photographs or anything. And that's one of my most important paintings. But also there was another of a scene where we opened a medical outpost in Helmand province in Sangin, then and now one of the most dangerous places in the world, and we had a female medic there for the day, and a little girl was brought in unable to walk. She had a completely maimed leg and foot, and I saw her sitting down terrified. I mean, she looked at me and she saw my camera and my little chair that I sit on, and I think she thought it was a gun. But I looked at her, and I looked at the fierce embrace that her father held her in. The Afghans have such pride. They're absolutely brilliant people. And I thought, I'm not going to ask him what happened to her foot or her leg. I'm going to try and capture that sense of dignity and pride, which again is not being told by the main story of Afghanistan at the time, which was about the war. They weren't being portrayed as these very honourable family men that they are. And his whole community came around him and this girl, this child. And I saw her dressed in white, a little bit like a symbol of hope for Afghanistan, in that she was a girl, she was going to take her country forward. She looked at me with such defiance and such absolute fearless courage. I thought, gosh, if Afghanistan can go somewhere, it will be in the hands of women. And related to that was another painting I did of these girls dancing in the national school uniform, which sadly now is a thing of the past, for the time being anyway. But I was in Byam in the centre of Afghanistan, and I came across a group of schoolgirls, and they were holding hands and they were dancing. It was almost like Matisse's dance. And they stopped me, and in between their giggles and their shyness, some of them spoke beautiful English. They said, tell this to your country when you go home, that we are not just a land of men and beards and guns and violence. We are girls who love to dance, who love to wear red lipstick. Tell them this when you go home. And these are the same girls that walk 5 miles to school every day, walked, in pursuit of an education. And their school was probably just a dusty 2-room building somewhere. But they were that determined to see their education through. So to anyone who cares to listen, I say, goodness me, when people are prepared to do that for education, Don't ever take it for granted. And now this is what Afghanistan has lost. Not one girl can be educated in that country. So these are really historic paintings, and I hope something that we will see again before too long. So Ukraine's interesting. It's still quite recent. I was there only a few months ago, and I link it in my mind very closely to my experience in Syria, which is strange because, of course, they are culturally and geographically miles apart. But what I saw was what happens when there is systematic targeting of civilians and the most vulnerable underbelly of society, and that is women and children. I saw it in Syria. I saw it in the cities of Aleppo and Homs. Schools bombed, humanitarian centres bombed, hospitals bombed, buses with school children on, trying to escape, trying to flee, bombed. I don't think it can be told just through paintings. So I actually, with the help of some Ukrainian soldiers, we broke into this school in Hostomel, which was one of the first points of contact when the Russians invaded. And I salvaged as much material as I could from this school. Children's books, shoes, educational devices such as a globe, and the globe obviously had been completely smashed in the bombing. And I have all these materials which I'm going to do a small, but I hope impactful installation with, alongside 350, 400 children's artworks, Ukrainians, Syrians, Afghan children, as well as British school children. The drawings and the paintings and the artwork and the words that I've been sent are very overwhelming and very, very powerful. And again, make me feel very small as an artist, because I think some of the children's artwork is so much stronger than anything I could ever do. But I'm trying. Well, as Picasso said, the whole of our adult life as artists is an attempt to unlearn our adulthood and return to the truth of the way a child sees. And that's what I'm working with. That's the material I'm working with, which is really a tremendous privilege. There's a danger that we all suffer a little bit too much from the continuous newsreel of atrocities and war, and perhaps give in to a little bit of compassion fatigue. What can we do? It's all so dreadful. It is so horrific what's happening in Gaza right now that we've almost forgotten about Ukraine. Oh, and Syria was years ago. I don't think we should give in to the ease of despair. I think we can always do something or change the way we think. Trying to turn that a never-ending cycle of violence, reverse it. I mean, in Afghanistan, I saw people who had only ever known war, 40 years of war. Boys who had not learnt to read and write, they had only learnt how to use a gun and kill. I try and find those glimmers of humanity, of courage, the smile in a child hidden underneath the rubble, the hope that is always there if you look for it, and the monumental acts of love and courage and connection going on across the world today. And that's what I'm trying to capture, communicate and elicit through my work, against, of course, a backdrop of tremendous darkness. As my work as a war artist has progressed, my children are growing up, so I see it very much filtered through a mother's lens. My daughter's now 13. I think every day what that would be like to be a 13-year-old girl in Afghanistan. And it breaks my heart. I think of my son, who's 11, as a Ukrainian mother and potentially as a British mother, what it means if he's conscripted and has to go to war. Of course it changes you, all this experience, and I will continue to paint. I am doing my own paintings in conjunction to the children's artwork. I see it as a dialogue, but I want them to lead. I want them to have the louder voice and for me to be a little bit more in the background, because I think theirs is a voice that demands to be heard. A 12-year-old or an 11-year-old did, of a boy falling almost from the sky into the rubble of a blown-up city with a tank in the foreground. I mean, I've seen those cities so many times. That's Aleppo, that was in Ukraine, that was Homs, that was Basra, destroyed cities, and yet there's this sort of fallen angel coming from the heavens is very, very powerful, and I think it was done by a 12-year-old boy. There's another of a younger child who drew her teddy bear and then ripped it in half, and that talks about the savage renting of stolen childhood, but also the violence that is perpetrated upon children in war, sexual violence, exploitation, terrible, terrible trauma, which is why it's a great privilege to work with Beyond Conflict, which is the UK's, we're small, but nonetheless, I hope, very strong mental health charity to help conflict-related trauma, especially in women and children. And it was in that capacity that I went to Ukraine with the co-founder of Beyond Conflict to look at the psychiatric and conflict-related trauma aspects. And when I went, I met the head of the GLOBSEC PTSD task force, and she just looked me straight in the eye and she goes, Arabella, 100% of my country has got PTSD, 100%. From your 1-year-old to your 100-year-old. On the Oxford Street in London, you'll see much less good there than a bomb raid shelter in Ukraine. Sometimes the deprivations in life help focus, and focus what's really important. And nothing can be more important than the love to one another. And not just the love of a mother to a child, but the love of a stranger to a stranger. I think that's what really taught me, working with refugees taught me so much. That was a huge privilege. I mean, my faith plays a very strong part in every aspect of my life. God, if your eyes are open, reveals himself to you at every step of the way, whether it's through that human connection, whether it's through those acts of unimaginable courage and love, or the love between a mother and a child that you might see in the middle of a bombing raid. There was a mother and child, actually, the painting just there, who, when I was working in Lesbos, and these hundreds of people had been pulled in from the sea, they had all nearly been drowning. Well, they were drowning and they were rescued. And they'd just got off the Aegean Coast Guard boat. And there was hundreds of people, and they were saying Hamdalillah, and some were praying, and others were just kissing the ground. It was extremely powerful, dramatic moment. And amidst all of this, there was this woman who sat holding her infant child, just like this, so still, so utterly connected and in the moment. It was a very, very memorable image, which I did a painting of. And I thought, there is this stillness at the centre of the storm. There is God's love at the centre of the never-ending circle. And I think if you are aware of it, you start to see that possibility of hope, see that possibility of love, in spite of all. I think in a way, the darkness reveals that. And in the regular sense of the word, yes, I have a very strong faith. I think of the example that Jesus gave us. What an example. To say, having been so persecuted, on the crucifix, forgive them, they know not what they do. How can that not be, whether you have a faith or not, the most extraordinary and valuable lesson in how to be a human being? The possibility of forgiveness, the possibility of love, the possibility of seeing God's love in your fellow human being. That's what I'm trying to look for. And so often, that love is most readily encountered in the darkest corners of the world. It's as if the light, the candle, burns brightest in the darkness. In full daylight, you can't see it so well. And I think that should be something we all try and hold close to us as the world seems to be tipping into conflict. Our bright daylight might dim all too soon, and it's time we all held that candle close.